Hi, welcome to Leading at a Local Level, an MLG podcast, where we're here to basically help leaders who are leading at a local church level in particular to get better in their leadership. And I'm here with my good friend Tim. Hi Tim, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hopefully my camera won't die on me like it did in the last one, midway through an episode.
Absolutely. Well, let's see how it goes. So I'm John. It's great for everyone to be here. And Tim, we're in our episodes looking at people wisdom. This is number 6, and we're looking at situational discernment today. Perhaps you could just remind us of what we're thinking about when we talk about people wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just let's go to slide to the left. Yeah, cha-cha slide. But yeah, so we talked, didn't we, about really the disconnect that exists between so many leaders and their teams, or more leaders than we would hope for. And often, leaders can be high in character, high in competence, high in spirituality, but somehow there's a disconnect between, really getting traction with their team. And so how do, we talked about being people wise, being aware of people, and that begins really with being God aware, being aware of what God has done in our lives, about what his love for us, his care for us, our status, our position in Christ. And being aware of what God is doing in the church, in a season, in your organization, in your workplace. But then really it comes on to being self-aware. So it's being aware of like yourself and about your weaknesses, your strengths, how you communicate, how you don't communicate. It's about valuing other people. It's about recognizing that, you need to value others, not just because we say we value others, but really genuinely do that to understand them, to take the time to understand them, to harness their strengths. In the last one, we talked about managing our emotions, didn't we, John? We talked about that kind of sense of like, how do you not just control your emotional outbursts, but how do you actually like let it out? Share what's going on in you. It's not just about restricting emotions, but actually opening up. And so today we're going to be talking about something else, John, aren't we? Another made-up concept, another Tim and John original.
Absolutely. So this is the 6th, as Tim was saying. If you want to go back and catch the other, we have some building blocks to what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about situational discernment, and we're going to be talking a bit about mood. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But Tim, why don't you just define for us, what do we mean by situational discernment?
Yeah, so I think in leadership, one of the great skills of leadership is catching the mood, catching the mood of the group, and then responding effectively to that mood. And I think sometimes as leaders, we think that we can, we dictate the mood. And I think that sometimes we do, but I think a lot of the times, actually, there's already a kind of a collective mood, and part of our job is to harness and respond in that moment. So really, to me, that's situational discernment, how you respond in that, have you got any examples, John, that you can think of situational moments?
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of the time they're external things. So I think, the COVID situation has certainly, in our church, there was certainly a mood, just the particular place that we're in, the particular demographic of our church. There's a particular, about when do we reopen, are masks used? And, it's really interesting that the decisions that the leadership made may not have been the decisions that I would make in a vacuum, to be honest. I would make different decisions. However, there was quite a responsiveness to the mood, if you like, to what was going on in the congregation. There was a lot of anxiety around it, and a lot of people with a lot of health conditions and so on. So actually, they responded to that. Now there are in the future, as you move forward, there are arguments for how we then play that in the long run. But actually, at that time, responding to the mood was really helpful. How about you, either personally or sort of more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic's a brilliant one, isn't it? You're catching the mood at the moment, and it changed. And this is the thing about the mood; it changes. And so you can tell, well, we're in a COVID situation; we need to respond in a particular way. But you have to catch the mood. And some people at the beginning, people were nervous and cautious. Midway through, they were exhausted and tired. Then they get frustrated and annoyed at the restrictions. And then, again, where we are right now, we're kind of cases are rising again. And so we're kind of, we're being cautious again. And so it's understanding that. Can I say, I think that this is where, you can see it in politics over the last few years about how people have misjudged the mood. So you look at things like the Brexit vote, people didn't expect that to happen. And again, people just didn't catch the mood, particularly of a hidden group of people, a significant portion of a group of people who just felt quite strongly. Or you could look at the Trump Trump being elected again,
Yeah.
just missing that collective mood, really. And I think that is the key to leadership, is gathering, understanding that mood and moving in that moment, you know.
Brilliant. No, that's really helpful. So we're going to talk about moods. I think we're going to talk about 4 main moods. So why don't you start to take us through those, Tim? What's the first one?
Well, actually, it's more than 4 because I made some more up, as you do.
I'm going to learn
so,
something here too. This is great.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the first mood, I guess, is momentum.
Yeah.
Everyone loves momentum, right? You know, that feeling. Have you ever been in those kind of teams where it's like, yeah, we're pumped, we're going for this, we're working hard.
Yeah.
Everyone's energized. Things are happening. It's a dynamic season, and there's really momentum. We love that season, don't we? That is the best season to exist in. And I suppose that's the obvious one. That's what we're all aiming for, is a wonderful season of momentum. But in reality, you can't sustain it, can you, John?
That's right. And do you know what? We'll talk more about momentum another time, because I think someone said to me, it might even be you, Tim, who said, John, you focus a lot on vision, but vision is important. And we think it creates momentum, but actually it often doesn't. Actually, momentum is often the thing that we really want. So,
exactly. Yeah. And I think one thing just to note, often leaders think that vision creates momentum. I don't think it does. I think vision is part of what helps a little bit. Maybe might ignite a spark, but really there's a whole lot of other things that go into momentum. And so, I think it's just important. So that's the first mood, momentum. We love that. We're aiming for that.
Sounds good.
Really, it was good. The opposite end of that, this is just made up. So there's no kind of particular spectrum, or one doesn't necessarily lead to another, but is the season of discouragement, is a mood of discouragement. I mean, I think we've all been in churches like where that kind of stuff's happened. And I think discouragement, often you get like losses and setbacks. Like you've maybe had a few people who've left the church, or things haven't quite worked. You've done maybe you've tried like a series of kind of, I don't know, alpha courses or events, and people haven't really come, or everything's just been kind of tough. I remember when I was in a team, we had this big Ofsted, and we work at the school, and we'd worked so hard, and we were aiming for outstanding, and we got good. And it was just so deflating. It was just, everyone was so deflated for that season afterwards. You ever been in that kind of mood, John, in those kind of teams where people just generally has that feeling of just feeling a bit discouraged?
Yeah. And I think discouragement often comes from where we set our expectations. So we talk about encourage is where we go above that line. It's better than I expected. And the discouragement is, it's worse than expected. And so obviously leadership is often about saying, what are we expecting? Where are we going to head? What we're going to get these numbers? And I've been in those situations before where we've thought, we're going to do this in the next 5 years, and you get 3 or 4 years down the line, and you think, we've hardly gained anything, let alone grown our youth group or something. And that can be really discouraging, because it's just all this talk about, and obviously the spiritual language can come in as well, and not just spiritual language, genuine expectation that God's going to do this. And then that disappointment and discouragement when people think, well, but God hasn't done it, or someone's given a prophecy and it hasn't come to pass, and there can be that sort of air of discouragement that things haven't gone as you had expected. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we're saying, these are collective moods. So this is where the whole group of people are feeling a little bit flat, discouraged. And I suppose another way of looking at that is tiredness, right? Now, I do think tiredness is different to discouragement, John, because I think for me, you can be almost, momentum often leads to tiredness. I mean, maybe I should have put tiredness before before discouragement, but often you can be in a season of momentum, everything's going, it's brilliant, and you actually get kind of tired, like just physically you get tired, emotionally you get worn out. And sometimes you've got to sense that. I often sense that as a leader, like we've been burning hot for a while, and it's okay to burn hot. It's good. It's good to be in a season of momentum, but actually people are beginning to get, people aren't machines. They can't, and even machines can't run forever, can they? Sooner or later, they need a rest, or they need to be repaired, or, to have maintenance done on them. And I think often, I don't know about you, but I think a lot of people are sensing that now in this pandemic. Don't you think that tiredness has been a major factor?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the risk that I have, I can be very driven. And the risk is that I can think, I'm leading from the front, but then we get to periods of the time of the year, and I've actually, I'll be really honest, I've thought, people are just being a bit, I don't know, being a bit weak. They want to rest. Like, let's
Yeah.
not rest over the summer. Why are we winding things down, leadership team? This is the time to be winding things up. If we're ready in August, if we get ready by the 31st of August for this, wow, we are going to be good to go. The growth's going to come. And I've had, a senior pastor in the last church I was an elder at saying to me, no, we need a rest. People need a
Yeah.
rest. And probably you need a rest as well. It took me a few years to work it out through my own tiredness and exhaustion and ultimate burnout. But also learning that he was judging them, and he could see that people were getting tired and that we needed a break. Even if it did cost us some preparation, that was more important. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a leader, judging that mood, and sometimes you can confuse discouragement and tiredness.
Yes.
Sometimes you might think, oh, people are really discouraged, they're really fed up. They're not, they're just tired.
Yeah.
Collectively, there's a sense of like, oh, it's hard work at the moment. And that's just how you respond to that is so important. Yeah. The fourth one I've got, uncertainty.
Yeah.
Right. So uncertainty is an odd, this often is an odd mood, but this often happens when there's change happening. And I sense that, like, even around, so the COVID changes would be a really obvious example of like, should we be meeting? Should we not be meeting? Should we be, wearing masks? Like, should we be kind of, how should we do home groups or prayer? And there's this uncertainty, and there's not discouragement. They're not tired. They're not, but there's just uncertainty. Like, that's the collective mood, really, is uncertainty. And I've seen it around like building programs or new initiatives in the churches. Like, people just need a bit of time sometimes in that season of uncertainty to like know that, and judging that people are, and this is the key, as a leader, identifying this is a season of uncertainty, and therefore I need to respond to the uncertainty rather than trying to kind of like either treat it as discouragement, like people are all fed up or discouraged, or treat it as something else. Realize that people are uncertain and respond to that uncertainty appropriately will help you be people wise. It's being wise about how to respond to how people are feeling in that moment.
Brilliant. Okay, so that was those are four. As you said, there's more. So
I've got more, John.
Go on. Give us a couple more, because what they want us to do is make sure we're getting practical and thinking about how we respond to these moods. So go for it.
Absolutely. So there's the fifth one, which is plodding, right? Yeah. So sometimes there's just a season of plodding, right? Yeah. Just getting on with it, getting on with the plodding, right? Plod.
I find those really difficult.
Yeah.
I find that really difficult. I want it to be exciting. I want new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tough, simple, really, isn't it? Nothing complicated, but knowing you're in that season is okay, and just accepting that. And sometimes being I always used to think that about schools are always on for continuous improvement, and it was just like, can we not just get on with it for a little while? Give us a couple of months just to get on with it. So that's it. Then there's a couple more. The couple more that I'm going to add now, really just, I would say, very rare. They don't happen very often. You just need to be aware of them, and I think people generally respond quite well, certainly to the first one, which is trauma. So we've been in situations where, if someone like important in the church has died, so sometimes tragically, I know that people have been in situations where the leaders died, or maybe an elder, or someone's got cancer, or there's been and the church is traumatized. Maybe you've got a moral failure in your team, and someone does something and they committed a sin, and the leaders had to step down. Again, that's a season of trauma, and you have to respond appropriately to that. And the seventh. And I think this is quite important, and this doesn't happen very often, but it does happen if you don't. I think this happens when you don't get the other ones right or respond appropriately. Is that what happens? People collectively start to feel angry, and I think you can sense it. I mean, we're recording this. I know that this is meant to be non-time relevant, but we're recording it obviously midway through a pandemic, and you can sense the sense of frustration and anger over sort of the way that government have behaved more personally than kind of policy-wise. And you can sense there's anger and frustration building towards their leadership, and it's a collective feeling that even people that are normally quite supportive are feeling quite angry. And if you don't catch that as a leader, that's why often church meetings, so you get all these explosions of people in church meetings, because you haven't read that there's anger already under the surface that you're not approaching. Sorry, John. Is that? I know it's probably a lot, but
no, it's great. No, it's good. So it's good. People can obviously go back over those, and we'll put those sort of points just below. So no, that's really helpful too. I wonder if I can just summarise them, because we've been talking about what those moods are, and you've referred, I think, to sort of the influences of these. So you're just mentioning there the sort of more sort of national factors. We talked about pandemic. We talked about the news. There's other issues that have gone on, obviously, in the States. We've got Black Lives Matter, and actually we've talked about recognizing that the sort of the global, the national mood, and that impacts on all sorts of things around mask wearing and so on and so on. So I think that's really important. We talked about social media in one of our episodes as well, about how that can be a way that as leaders we probably need to be aware of what we can pick up the mood in those areas. So we've got the global stuff, then you've got the local stuff, haven't we? So the local factors, it might be, I've noticed people responding to the pandemic differently from what I call a middle to upper class church, and some of the way that they've been impacted compared to a more, shall I say, working class church.
Yeah, definitely.
Any other local factors you've noticed, Tim, that might impact sort of how the situation?
Yeah, so again, the mood is going to be impacted by the culture of the church, isn't it? So if your church is kind of, got a particular culture, they'll fall into certain moods more quickly. I think that matters. I think, things like just stuff happening in local church. If you get a few baptisms, for example, that's going to change things. Or if you get, and I think being aware of what's going on locally in your situation, maybe again, you've got a few families in the church that are struggling with, say, health conditions or something, and that will affect mood. And it's not always negative. It's not always your fault as a leader. This is the point, is that sometimes the mood is influenced outside of you. We think we should influence the mood, but if a family's going through I don't know, if someone's dealing with cancer, for example, and the church is feeling that, that's going to affect you. That's going to affect the leadership, and you can't change that. You just got to roll with it and work within that, I think. So yeah.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay, so we've talked about some of those moods. So what we want to do though is say, how do we judge the mood, but how do we actually kind of take the temperature of what's going on, and then how do we respond to that? So why don't you kick us off, Tim, and thinking how do we sort of judge the mood around us, the situation?
Well, that's a great question, John. I think you can't judge the mood by yourself. I think that's what I'd say. First thing is that you don't use yourself as the core measure of how to do it, of what the mood is, because sometimes as leaders we're either slightly ahead or slightly behind. So often we're not necessarily. We might be feeling encouraged and pumped, but the church has just been through a massive sort of season of loss, and we're feeling really energized because we've processed it and God's dealt with us, and we've got the vision for the next stage, but everyone else is still behind. And I think sometimes, there can be a mismatch. So I reckon, I don't know if you've experienced, have you ever experienced that, John?
Absolutely. And I think, and you've mentioned this to me before, so it's not my point, but at the beginning of the pandemic, when I'm hearing all the leadership podcasts that I listen to, and it's the common theme is that people leading were as initial shock, and then there was this great bound of enthusiasm. And in my organization, we put out loads of live prayer stuff, and I did loads of podcasts, and I was absolutely pumped and excited about it. And that's what I think is normal. And then I realized that I'm not normal. And that
you're not normal, John. That's for sure.
Not the majority response, but I think it's right. I mean, I often find myself walking ahead. That's just where I'm at. I'm walking ahead of him, not in the sense of I'm more advanced or better in any way. It can be a real negative, But yeah, if I think I'm the barometer and my mood's the barometer of what's going on, you're right. I am sorely wrong, because I'm just not in people's situations the way I think. I'm not a great barometer, so I agree.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah. I reckon also asking a lot of people is important. So again, just asking people inside your core team is not a good measure, because sometimes they're feeling very encouraged or they're feeling very discouraged. I mean, this is often the way. Often leaders can feel very discouraged. Again, you talked about I think you talked about earlier, didn't you? The gap between expectation and reality, and often the stress comes between expectation and reality.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got high expectations but reality's down here, then you can be quite discouraged. And I think sometimes as leaders, particularly leadership teams, we have high expectations. Actually, everyone else in the church is actually just plodding along. They're in the plodding season. They're quite happy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You think, oh, everything's really difficult. People must be feeling really discouraged because we're discouraged. And people are like, no, it's good. It's all right. Keep going.
So so rather than saying to them, what's the mood? Because unless people listen to this podcast, which obviously would be great if they did, they might be like, what are you talking about? So what are some practical questions that you actually might ask this range of people who, you get this, you to take the temperature?
Yeah, that's good, really. I think some of the questions I ask are things like, what do you think God's doing in the church right now? And if the season is discouragement, then you might hear things like people sort of saying, well, I just, I really feel the Lord is just, needing to get underneath us and encourage us and just, wants to build his people up or care for the church. If you're in a season of plodding, often people say, well, I just feel the Lord's encouraging us to be faithful, whereas if you're in a season of momentum, people might say things like, we just need to keep pressing on, keep reaching out, So how people respond to the question, what is God doing in the church right now, is really interesting. And trying to ask that, what do you think God is doing, I think is a really good, just a really simple question, but often that's quite powerful. What questions would you ask, John?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure really, because I don't think I'm very good at it. I'll be honest, as you're saying, and I think breaking it down into language that people understand is probably really, really important. So yeah, what do you think God's doing? How are you feeling about this response? And for those of who are leading groups, I sort of oversee people in my my organizational work who oversee groups. So I will often say, what are you picking up from your group? Both things that are said and what do you think people are saying? But also, what are they not saying? And getting, and also then putting people into the room together, or the virtual room, and having people share that. And I find that really helpful for my staff team who are kind of in London, and everyone, to hear that themselves. They need to hear what's going on out there, what people are saying, because otherwise you get in this little bubble of like, well, we're in the office, or you might be a leadership team, and you have these weekly meetings, and you think everyone gets the mission and the vision and the values of the church, but actually they're like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. It's really valuable information.
I love that idea of the bubble, and it's just so like we didn't like write this in our notes, but I just think like the idea of the bubble, you can exist in a bubble. And that's what I was saying about be careful about using yourself as a measure in your leadership team. Like you need to get out your bubble basically and be like, how is it? What's actually like on the ground? Have you ever seen those TV shows? Was it like the Undercover Boss?
Yes, I love those. I know the shock on their faces. Yeah.
What's that? Sorry, say that again, John.
The shock on their faces sometimes when they realise what it's actually like, or or how they're talking about them, when they don't realise they're standing there, they're dressed up, in this beard or whatever, and they're slagging them off, and they're like, actually, you're slagging me off, but you don't know anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But you can't really do undercover pastor, can you? It's a bit of a. Although I'm sure there's a comedian called John Christ who did undercover pastor. I don't think it would work in my church. I don't think people.
I've heard this sermon illustration many times where there must be a bigger church where the pastor's dressed up as a homeless person and come and sat in the church to see how, like a mystery shopper thing, to see how he was treated. It would be interesting to. I love going to other, visiting other places and just seeing how they work, and what things look like. Just to gauge it from another perspective. Anyway, so asking questions, that's one thing we can do, but obviously that's very kind of explicit. What are some more subtle, implicit ways we can kind of take that temperature?
Yeah, so I think one thing that I'm always trying to measure is engagement, is the level of engagement and how people engage. So, things like prayer, for example, if you're in a season of momentum, your prayer meeting is often full. Often, if you're in a season of discouragement, again, what are people praying about? So like that, I'll often listen to that and hear, okay, there's a lot of people praying about things they're struggling with. So how much fun are you having? I think that's a great, when you get together, is there that kind of, on Sunday morning, is it like really, are people laughing a lot? Is there a lot of banter is a really good measure, I think. If you've got really healthy, happy banter and people are taking the mickey out of each other.
Bantometer.
The bantometer, yeah. That's again, Tim and John original. That's copyrighted. That the bantometer, you know. But yeah, no, I think those are good signs really about where you're up to. If people are leaving quite quickly after the meeting, you know, that's a good one. You know, subtle things really. You know, it's just if you float a new idea, how do people respond? Is everyone a bit like, oh, you know, or if people kind of like, oh, it's not going to work, it's probably not going to work, or then you'll know, you know, I'm in a season of discouragement. You know, if maybe you're, you know, kind of feeling just a bit tired or, whatever. I think that's quite important. If people are uncertain, they're, you know, again, like floating a new idea is a good way of measuring people's response, I think.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, without teasing people too much.
Indeed.
No, that's great. And of course, it goes without saying, and this is why we put the God awareness at the center, genuinely not just to say, oh, we just need to kind of, I don't know, baptize these ideas, but because actually asking God and waiting on God, you know, both individually, but as you say, also as a collective, to say, God, what is it that you're doing? You know, what is it you're doing in our nation? What is it you're doing in our community, in our church, in the people here? And just seeing what God's saying about it, because that's primary. Okay, so everything else is around that for a reason, because what God's doing is most important, and that may surprise us. It may be that we're being called to be a bit countercultural. You know, we're always called to be countercultural to the church, but it might be that certain things that we've been called to do, and so I think that's really, really key. Yeah. So judging the mood, that's great. And then just as we finish then, so just some examples, Tim, of how we can respond to the collective mood. And maybe you might give us some examples from some of those 7 moods that we mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, I won't run through every single one and try and say you should respond to each of them. But I think like some of the key ones I suppose I've seen is that, like, say you're in a season of discouragement, is like being real about that. I think one of the greatest frustrations to people is if you're in a season of discouragement, if you've taken a loss, and almost pretending that it isn't a loss and that things aren't difficult is just so unwise, really. I think, you know, there's a lot in the Bible about lament, isn't there? About kind of sorrow and frustration and sadness. And I think as a leader, you've got to be coming back to managing emotions, really, and understanding people, valuing people. It's realizing that if people are in that place, they need time to process some of that loss. I think that's, you know, that's so important, really. I think, you know, sort of worth thinking that through, really. You know, what would you do in a season of tiredness, John? If you were in a season of tiredness, how would you respond to that?
Having learned from my friend a few years ago, actually saying let's have a break. So let's do something less. So let's make Sundays a bit less full on. Let's have a break from some of our small groups, for example. You know, let's actually stop some activities for a few weeks. Don't start new things. There can be seasons, as you say, where it's just not wise to start something new, even if it's what I want to do. But let's pause that. Let's put that off till, you know, for a few months, for example. Those are just some ideas.
Using natural breaks. So like we're you know, when we do Christmas, we'll have like a break from home groups, prayer meetings, and we'll often stretch that out a week or two into January as well, to let people kind of get over that kind of initial January blues kind of type mode, you know, kind of getting back to school and start back maybe the week after that kind of thing. You know, is quite important, I think. You know, just gives you natural breaks over the summer, cut all stuff back in the summer, give people time in the summer. That's just important. Well, what John, what would you do, for example, if you were in a season of plodding? So, because that's quite a difficult one, isn't it? Like, because I think sometimes leaders hate the idea of plodding. How might you respond if you were in a season of plodding, do you think?
I'd just be really honest. As I said, I find plodding, I think just acknowledging that that's okay. I think it's been really helpful, just acknowledging that this is just part of, and I think for me, it's just being reminded, talking with other people and being reminded that that's okay. And when I've had people say to me, who I admire and respect, and they say to me, do you know what? That's okay. You know, you may hear the highlights, you may see like my social media pages light up with this and that and this, you know, and it can be so easy to think of those highlights and think, well, that's the reality all the time. So I think asking people honestly, you know, what does it look like to be a leader when things are feel like in that plodding stage? I think just acknowledging it, talking to people about it. Can I use a cycling analogy?
So I used to be, and John and I used to be quite into cycling, and do that kind of stuff. And a lot of my friends still are. I've been a bit fat and lazy for a while, but we would often cycle for like, literally 100+ miles a day, through the middle of Europe somewhere to Belgium or France. And you go through these seasons, you go through these collective moods, as it were. And there's moments when you're all like, you're going quick, you're going downhill, everyone's driving fast, it's brilliant, it's great fun. There's seasons when you're just tired, when everyone's just weary, and it's like, when there's seasons and moments of discouragement when you kind of you get another flat tire and everyone's got to stop and wait and everyone starts to get cold and fed up. But the thing I've learned more than anything is about this plodding season is realizing that every meter you pedal, every mile you cover, you're getting towards your ultimate destination. And I think that's what's quite important is having a sense of where you're going. I think is so important, and realizing that actually it's okay. You're gonna go through those seasons up and down, and judging that as a leader is really key to being able to manage your people well and get people, keeping people going forward together is the key, really, I guess. And these plodding seasons are probably the most obvious. You get, probably 60-70% of life is plodding, and I think that, what I often talk about is where we're trying to get to. This is about seeing people saved, and it's about seeing people grow, and that just takes time. You can't grow an oak tree in 5 minutes. It takes a long time, and having that big picture at the same time of like, this is kingdom takes time. I think to me is how you continue to encourage yourself and others in those seasons of plodding, and allowing momentum to come naturally rather than just trying to force it. I think, so I don't know if that's helpful, but
fantastic. Well, that's great. I mean, I was going to think it's time to wrap up. Is that all right, Tim?
Let's wrap up, John.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, thanks for joining us. I mean, and Tim, it's been great to chat through this model, this people wisdom model, as we say. We mentioned at the beginning that sometimes people think, get a leader with great character and a plan, real competence, and that's what's going to move people forward. But as you say, we've been saying, our experience is actually engaging people. It's this people wisdom thing that when you put that together with godly character, that actually that's when we often move forward. And so we hope that's been a helpful model. We're going to be revisiting it, I'm sure. But that's the 6th of our episodes looking at that model. We've loved chatting about it. And if you've got questions you'd like to ask us, or comments, things that you think actually would be, why don't you include this next time? Or please do comment. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you found this helpful, do feel free to share it. Subscribe if you haven't, give us a like. And just be good to carry on that conversation. So we look forward to seeing you for another episode in the near future. Tim, bye for now. See you soon.
Thanks, mate. See you later. Bye now.
Bye.